Hello dear buddies, how are you all doing? I hope everybody is doing well, right? So let me welcome you all to KP powered by PW. And who am I? I am going to be your biology buddy Nikita. Okay? Now, we are going to start off with the very most important chapter of biology for class 10th. It holds the maximum weightage, okay? So we are going to have an ultimate recap so that we can summarize the entire chapter within 2 hours, okay? So be ready with me and we are going to learn a lot of things, the entire life process chapter in just 2 hours, okay? So let us begin that what all things are going to be there in today's class. So let's see, we have the different life processes and those are nutrition, respiration, transportation and excretion, okay? So we are going to learn all these different life processes, okay? But hey, what is life process? Alright, let's discuss that. What do we know as life processes, okay? Now think about day-to-day activities. Think about you and just look at the surrounding. What all things do you observe? You might observe a table, okay? And hey, of course, I know you guys are taking notes. So you have your pen, you have your notes. Now you might have your parents, right? And some greenery in your room, all right? Or might be there out of your window. So there could be plants and who all likes puppies and dogs in their homes, all right? I know you guys might be dog person or cat person. Not to worry about that, okay? So let's write certain animals as well. All right, now what are these? So when we have to look at them, we will categorize them into living, okay? We will categorize them into living and non-living things, okay? But how do we categorize them as living and non-living? Just what do we know as the criteria that parents are living and table is non-living? How? Because they are sustaining life, okay? Now, how do we know that they are sustaining life? Because a lot of processes are happening in their body so that they can maintain and sustain life, okay? Now, what are these processes? So, all those processes required to maintain and sustain life of an individual are known as life processes, okay? For example, we have talked about respiration, nutrition, transportation, excretion, okay? All these processes are life process, okay? Now, let's talk about these life processes one by one and I hope you guys are super energetic to learn about it, okay? But hey, now I've asked you guys to be energetic, but where do we get this energy from? Alright, let's discuss this in the very first life process, okay? But before that, do you guys know that our body is approximately made up of 37.2 trillion cells? Now, let me count the zero in trillions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Not only those, it has 12 zeros. So this trillion, that means it has 12 zeros. Okay, just imagine the number of these cells in our body. Now, each and every cell has to live, all right? And to maintain their sustenance, of course, they require energy. But the question still remains, where do they get this energy from, right? So, let us see that how do we get our energy from. Everybody suggests to have our food daily, right? So, alright, one component would be our food. But is food only enough to get this energy? Of course not. Because from this food, we need essential nutrients. Okay? Nutrients are essential substances present in the food that we eat that will help us to make energy. But these nutrients are also not enough, right? So then, what do we need? We need oxygen. Alright, so we need food and oxygen. This food in the presence of oxygen will be broken down to form energy through the cellular processes. Okay, so here we get our energy. But hey, any biochemical reaction will form products right? Here the ultimate product is energy. We need it to do the day-to-day activities. Even the cell requires it to perform all these functions. Okay. Similarly, during any other metabolic reactions, you will get the ultimate product, but you will also receive certain byproducts. So in this process, we will receive certain byproducts as well. Now let us talk about it. Where do we get this food and oxygen from, right? So let's talk about that there are certain processes going on in our life so that we can acquire this food and oxygen to make energy. But we take the food from our mouth. You agree with me, right? And oxygen, we have nose for it, right? But how do we take this food and how do we take this oxygen to each and every cell? So for that, we require a transportation medium. Just like our car, we need transportation medium so that we can transfer all of these food and oxygen to each and every cell. Okay, so all of these processes to obtain the food and oxygen, their breakdown to obtain energy, their transportation so that they can reach each and every cell, and also there will be waste products formed, right? And we need to get rid of these waste products as well. Otherwise, they will be harmful, right? So, of course, we have to get rid of them, and that is done by the process of excretion, which is another life process. Now, I've talked about all of these life process. It's time for us to revise and summarize all of these life processes one by one. Okay, so are you guys ready? Let's begin. First, we are going to talk about nutrition. Now, whenever there is a term T-I-O-N, shun, what is it? It is actually a phenomenon. Phenomenon of what? Let's talk about it. Okay, so you can say the phenomenon of uptaking the food. Okay, the phenomenon of uptaking the food and its utilization to support life is known as nutrition. Okay, the process of uptake of food and its utilization so that they can support life to do various functions such as running, jogging, learning, staying alive and getting energy to do all those functions, right? So for that we need energy, and that uptake of food to make this energy is known as nutrition. Okay, now you might have seen several organisms, different organisms are there, right? We have named some organisms earlier as well, parents, animals and plants, right? So different organisms have different modes of getting this nutrition. Now how? So let's talk about that some organisms can make their own food, while other organisms cannot make their own food. So they depend on other organisms for their food, right? So on this basis, that whether those organisms can synthesize their food or not, we have categorized the mode of nutrition into two. Okay, so let's talk about then autotrophic mode of nutrition. Okay, word auto means self and trophic means trophos, which comes from the word trophos, which means nourishment. Okay, so those organisms which are capable of self-nourishment are known as autotrophs, while those organisms which cannot synthesize their own food, so they depend on other organisms. So here the word hetero means others and trophic of course means nourishment, right? So these organisms depend on other organisms for their nourishment. That type of nutrition is known as heterotrophic mode of nutrition. Alright, now let's talk about that who are autotrophs and who are heterotrophs. So let's suppose that the green plants, certain bacteria and algae, green algae, they consist of a special magic pigment, okay, and that gives them green color, and that pigment is chlorophyll. Okay, so those organisms which consist of the magic pigment chlorophyll, such as green plants and algae, they can synthesize their own food and hence they are known as autotrophs. Okay, whereas other organisms like for example us humans, animals, right? So all of them are heterotrophs. And there is little bit 1% of plants approximately which cannot prepare their own food. Now think of a reason why very quickly. Of course, because they do not have this magic pigment chlorophyll. Alright, so they will depend on other organisms for their nutrition, and those organisms will be heterotrophs, right? For example, humans, and there could be other animals as well. They depend on other organisms for their nutrition. Okay, now let's talk about these green plants. That how are they capable to produce their own food, right? So let's talk about that. In the green plants specifically we are going to talk about that they consist of, let's see, in the leaf of the green plant. Okay, in the leaf. So this is the site of the nutrition. What's happening here? There is a special process going on, and that special process is known as photosynthesis. Now what is photosynthesis, right? So let's break the term. Whenever there's a big term, you have to break it into two or further many words so that we can categorize the meaning of them. Okay, so here let's talk about them. Photo, as we know, like whenever we need to click our photos, what do we need? Special light, right? Of course, we're talking about aesthetic photos and our photo in nature, right? So we need some special light, right? A good lighting is very much required, right? So to take that photo, that means we need light. So this photo term is related with light. Okay. Now what does this synthesis means? Synthesis means to bring together, to synthesize, to produce. Okay. So here we are writing to bring together. Now connect these terms. So bringing together certain substances in the presence of light to form the ultimate product. Okay, and that is known as photosynthesis. Alright, now let's talk about that. What are these certain products that we are going to talk about, right? So let's see that the green plants perform photosynthesis in the leaf. Okay, now they require certain raw materials, and those raw materials are carbon dioxide and water. Now where do they get these carbon dioxide and water from, right? So let's see that in the leaves, maximum in the lower surface of the leaf, okay, in the lower epidermis, you will see that there are tiny pores present, surrounded by the kidney shaped guard cells. These tiny pores are known as stomata. Okay, and these stomata will help to perform two functions. They will help in gaseous exchange. Okay, they will help in gaseous exchange as well as they will help in transpiration. What is transpiration? To get rid of the excess amount of water from the plants in the form of water vapor. Okay, this is transpiration. Alright, now, so where do we get this carbon dioxide from? This carbon dioxide is received from the atmosphere through the gaseous exchange by the stomata. Okay, now you might see that the plants are uprooted in the soil. Okay, and soil consists of water. So the plants take up the water from the soil. This water is taken up by the roots, okay, from the soil. All right, so here we get this water absorbed from soil, by the roots. Okay, now what is essentially required? So here all this process takes place in the presence of sunlight. Okay, so in the presence of sunlight, of course there is a source, that is sun. Okay, so in the presence of sunlight with a special pigment, as we have talked about, right? And that special pigment gives green color to the plants, and that is going to be your chlorophyll. this chlorophyll is going to absorb the sunlight, okay, to convert this solar energy into chemical energy, okay. Now, carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunlight with the help of chlorophyll, they will form a carbohydrate as a food, and that carbohydrate is your glucose, releasing a byproduct which is oxygen gas in the atmosphere. Alright, now let's talk about that this food is formed in the form of glucose, but excess of glucose in the plant is stored in the form of starch. Okay, similarly in humans, excess of glucose is stored in the form of glycogen in our liver and muscle cells. Okay, here this excess glucose is stored in the form of starch. Okay, so this was all about plants. Now what about other organisms? So let's talk about now heterotrophic mode of nutrition. Now heterotrophic mode of nutrition, that means they depend on other organisms. They depend on other organisms for their nutritional requirements. Okay, now there are lot of organisms now. So who all depends on which organism? Alright, so on that basis, that where do these organisms obtain their nutrition from, we have categorized heterotrophic nutrition into 3 types: holozoic nutrition, saprophytic nutrition, or parasitic nutrition. Okay, now saprophytic is specially for trees or plants, so we can also write it as saprotrophic. Okay, now let's talk about that what all these things mean. So here holozoic nutrition means they ingest the organic matter from the surrounding and then they break it down inside their body. So the main purpose here is that the complex matter will be broken down into simple matter so that they can obtain energy. Okay, so here you can see that in holozoic nutrition, the organism ingests the organic matter and digest it. So you can say that they receive their nutrition by ingesting the organic matter and breaking it down into various steps. Okay, through various steps so that they can receive their energy. Alright, that type of mode of nutrition is known as heterotrophic nutrition. Okay, for example, it happens in humans. Of course, we also ingest our food. Okay, now humans, this also happens in amoeba and it also occurs in paramecium. Okay, then we have the saprophytic nutrition or saprotrophic nutrition. It means those organisms which obtain their nutrition from the dead or decaying matter. Those organisms are known as saprophytes if we are talking about plants, and saprotrophs, okay, we are talking about animals. Okay, so they get their nutrition from dead and decaying matter. Moving forward to talk about the different steps of holozoic mode of nutrition as we were talking about. Okay, so here it involves 5 steps. So this organic matter, or you can say food first will be ingested. Ingested means it will be taken inside the body. Okay, now here this substance is complex, but we have to break it down into simpler substance to get energy from it, right? So what we do here is that we break down this complex substance into simpler substance. And how? So this breakdown of the complex substance into simple substance is known as digestion. Okay, it is the second step of holozoic nutrition. Now, after digestion, we get the small nutrients, right? Those are essential substances which will give us energy. Okay, so these substances will be absorbed in our body, or you can say taken up in the body. Okay, so that process or that step is absorption. But then these nutrients has to be taken in through each and every cell. so that it can be utilized to get that energy, so that your various functions like repair, the energy required to perform various functions could happen, right? So that process to take up these nutrients and its utilization for the repair and growth and development of cell is known as assimilation. Okay, and then finally there would be some food, right, that would not get digested or that would be waste. So what do? We cannot just pile it up in our body, right? So we need to expel it out, and that process to expel undigested food is known as egestion. Okay, so these are the 5 steps of Holozoic mode of nutrition through which different organisms like humans, amoeba and paramecium requires and receives their nutrition. Now if we are talking about humans, why don't we look it up into a little bit deep? Okay, so here let's talk about the human digestive system. It's very important to know about us, right? So let's see. Human digestive system is categorized into 2. All right, so here they have 2 important components. First is your alimentary canal. Alimentary canal, and of course you would require some certain helper cells and helper organs as well, right? So here they have helping glands, and those helping glands are known as accessory glands, right? Why do they perform all their functions on their own? They need help as well. So of course we have accessory glands here. Okay, now let's take a look at each of these components further. Okay, so this alimentary canal is a long hollow tube that begins from the mouth and ends at the anus. Okay, so now the complex matter will be broken down in this long hollow tube with various compartments. Like, so let's talk about them. That first, the mouth ingests the food. It takes up the food inside the body. Then the food is further moved to the oral cavity, or you can say the buccal cavity. The food then passes to the pharynx, and from the pharynx, the food now enters the food pipe. What is another name of food pipe? It is esophagus. Okay, the esophagus then contracts and relax, and this rhythmic movement is known as peristalsis. Okay, through the peristalsis movement, you will see that the food is now rushed towards the stomach, which is the J-shaped organ. Okay, now here a little bit of digestion will take place, and then the food then enters the small intestine. The name is only small, but it is actually the longest part of the alimentary canal. Interesting, isn't it? Now, here a little bit of, or you can say the maximum digestion will occur, all right, and the maximum absorption of food. You can say all the absorption of food takes place in the small intestine. Okay, now the undigested food now is further pushed down towards the large intestine, and finally it forms the feces, the waste material, which is then expelled out of the body through the anus. Okay, so let us take a look at these here again. The long hollow tube, which starts from the mouth and ends at the anus, goes through various components, right? That long tube is your alimentary canal. Now let us also take a look at the function of the each and every part. Okay, so from the mouth you will see that ingestion, or you can say ingested food enters the body. You can say the food is ingested through the mouth or the buccal cavity. Okay, then this ingested food now enters the esophagus, which is the food pipe. Now remember that esophagus only provides a passage so that the food can move down, but no digestion takes place here. Okay, whereas the digestion first starts in the mouth. So you will see that digestion begins in the mouth. Why? Because then they receive the secretions from the accessory glands. Okay, So let's talk about these accessory glands. That we have three accessory glands. We have salivary gland, then the largest gland of our body, liver, and then we have a leaf-like gland, that is your pancreas. Okay, so you will see that salivary glands are present in the mouth or in the buccal cavity that releases saliva, and the saliva will help to break down the food, to break down the starch or carbohydrate in the mouth. Thereby, digestion begins in the mouth. It's very important. Please remember, ingestion happens in the mouth and also digestion begins in the mouth. Okay? There is no digestion in esophagus. It just provides a passage so that the food can move down. Alright? Then we have the stomach, where digestion of protein mostly. Digestion of proteins happens. In the small intestine, the maximum digestion takes place, and also the entire absorption of food will take place. Okay? From here, the food is sieved out into the blood so that the blood can take it to each and every part of the cell. So here assimilation takes place from the small intestine. Okay, where the food is filtered out, the essential nutrient is filtered out into the blood, and this blood will take these nutrients to each and every cell. Okay, now this undigested matter reaches the large intestine, where absorption of water, remember, no absorption of food will take place in the large intestine, only absorption of water and electrolytes. Okay, and electrolytes will take place here. Okay, then finally through this anus, these undigested matter, you can say feces, which was stored in rectum, okay, that will be expelled out, and this process is known as egestion. Okay, so now let's talk about that. How does this complex matter got broken down into simpler matter, where all these processes took place. Okay, and what are the function of these other accessory glands? So let's talk about here. Let's see here that these accessory glands, salivary glands, are present in mouth. They secrete saliva. This saliva will break down the carbohydrate. Okay, it will break down the carbohydrate, mostly starch, into maltose. Okay, because saliva consists of salivary amylase, an enzyme. Alright, so because of this salivary amylase, you will see this carbohydrate is broken down first in the mouth. Then we have liver. Liver will secrete bile salts in the bile juice. These bile juice are stored in the gallbladder but then secreted in the small intestine. Okay, so secretion happens in the small intestine. Now, what are the function of these bile salts? So, bile salts will help in the emulsification of fat. What is emulsification of fat? So, let's talk about here. Let's see. See, we have large globules of fat, okay, large molecule of fat. And for the enzymes to act on these fat molecule, large fat molecule, is very difficult. So that's why we need to break it down into smaller, tiny droplets of fat, so that the enzymes can efficiently work on these fat, tiny droplets. Okay, this process of breakdown of the large globule of fat into tiny fat droplets is known as emulsification of fat. That is done by the bile salts, which was present in the bile juice secreted by the liver. Okay, now let's talk about this pancreas. So pancreas also secretes certain pancreatic juice, which consists of pancreatic enzymes, and these pancreatic enzymes will help in the breakdown, or you can say digestion, of different component of food, right? So that of course we can get energy from these nutrients once they get absorbed. All right, now so these are the function of the accessory glands. Because they release certain substances, their secretions will help in the digestion. Remember, in these accessory glands, no digestion takes place. They only help in the process of digestion by the secretions. Okay, Now, let's move further to talk about the digestion. Okay, digestion is a physico-chemical process. Physico-chemical, what do we mean by that? That means it's a physical as well as chemical process. Now, when you ingest your food, you have teeth, right? So you will break down the food into smaller, tiny bits. You will make it into paste, right? How? Because you cut it, grind it and chew the food. So that is physical process, okay, by the teeth. But then the chemical process that requires chemical enzymes. Enzymes are biocatalysts that will help in the chemical processes, okay. So that is done by the enzymes. Now here we are talking about digestion. So let's see that where does this chemical digestion takes place. So we have already talked about, right? Where does the digestion begin? Let's talk about the digestion first in mouth. Digestion first happens in mouth because of the presence of salivary amylase. Now this salivary amylase is secreted by the salivary glands in the saliva, okay, and this salivary amylase converts the starch, you can say, which is a form of carbohydrate. So first digestion of carbohydrate takes place in the mouth, where the starch or carbohydrate is converted or broken down into simple substance. I am not saying the simplest, remember it's the simple substance which is maltose. Alright, next, let's take this food next where in esophagus no digestion takes place. So let's take the food in the stomach. Now the stomach releases certain substances, right? For example, first it releases very concentrated hydrochloric acid to make the environment acidic so that they can activate this pepsinogen into pepsin. Pepsinogen is the inactive form, pepsin is the active form. This pepsinogen requires acidic environment which is given by the HCl. Okay, now you can see that this pepsin enzyme will digest protein into peptides. This is again chemical digestion taking place in the stomach. Okay, now let's talk about in the small intestine. So third we are talking about in the small intestine, because here remember that maximum digestion takes place in the small intestine. Okay, so let's talk about the small intestine here, that the small intestine receives secretion from the pancreas as well. Okay, now pancreatic enzymes such as trypsin will help in the digestion of further proteins again into peptides. Okay, then there would be amylase, but this amylase is not salivary amylase. It is pancreatic amylase to convert carbohydrate into maltose again, but this is done by the pancreatic amylase. Then we have lipase. Lipase will convert the tiny droplets of fat into its fatty acid as well as glycerol. Okay, as well as glycerol. Now remember that this was because of the secretion of the pancreas, but the small intestine also have their own enzyme. They also releases juice that will help in the digestion of further these peptides, maltose and fatty acids and glycerols. Okay, so let's see that the small intestine also releases enzymes such as peptidase to convert these peptides into amino acid. Then they have maltase to convert this maltose into the simplest form of carbohydrate, glucose, and it also releases lipase so that they can convert or they can digest the further remaining fat into fatty acid and glycerol. Okay, and these nutrients will help us to obtain energy from it. Okay, now let's move forward to talk about the simple question. Alright, we have learned a lot of things in the chapter nutrition. from life processes. Okay, so let's see if we are capable of answering this simple question. First, tiny pores that will help in gaseous exchange. So here we know in the leaves we have certain tiny pores present. Okay, and these tiny pores were known as, it was stomata. Okay, now next question. Type of nutrition which is common in amoeba and humans. There's a common nutrition mode in amoeba and humans. Amoeba is a unicellular microscopic organism. Humans are the complex organism. But a mode of digestion or mode of nutrition is similar. What is it? So it is our holozoic mode of nutrition. Okay. Now, a pigment that absorbs sunlight. Remember, the plants have special magic pigment, and that magic pigment was chlorophyll. Now, dash will make their own food. So, which all organisms can make their own food? So, those are autotrophs. Okay, let's see the answer. So, here you can see, yes, those organisms which have tiny pores that help gaseous exchange are stomatas. Type of nutrition common in amoeba and humans is holozoic mode of nutrition. Pigment that absorbs sunlight is chlorophyll. Okay, and make their own food. So that would be autotrophs. And what is the autotroph? So here you can say plants. Okay, hence you've got the answers to this question. Okay, understood? Now let's move forward to the next type of life process, which is respiration. Of course, we have talked about that the ultimate purpose here to get energy. But this energy cannot be obtained just from the food that we're eating. We also require oxygen, right? Now, where do we get this oxygen from? So, let's talk about that humans have a specialized organ system so that we can take up the oxygen, send it to each and every cell. Okay, so here let's see that respiration. How does this respiration takes place? Okay, so this respiration is again a physico-chemical process. How? So here you can say that it involves two processes, physical process and chemical process. Okay, so first step of respiration is breathing. In this breathing, we take up the oxygen-rich air and exhale or breathe out the carbon dioxide-rich air. Okay, and for this breathing, we have a special human respiratory system. So let's talk about it here. That you can see these tiny holes. These tiny holes are nostrils, from where we take up the air. Now the air is sent to the nasal cavity. Then from the nasal cavity, it goes through the common passage for the food and air, which is pharynx. Then the air is sent to the larynx, which houses the vocal cords. And when the air trespasses these vocal cords, you can see the vocal cords vibrates. And because of this vibration, it produces sound. Okay. Now, let's talk about that this larynx is now further continued into the trachea. This trachea is your windpipe. Okay. Now you can see on this trachea you will see certain cartilaginous or C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Okay. That will prevent this trachea from collapsing. Now you might have seen plant, right? That the plant will have a trunk that's very big and also wide stem, right? Then further it will start branching out. The big branches, then smaller branches, right? Similarly, you will see that this trachea will further branch out into two tubes, and these two tubes are known as bronchi. Now these bronchi will further branch out into smaller thin tubules, and these tubules are known as bronchioles. On the tip of these bronchioles, you will see certain sac or balloon-like structure, and these balloon-like structure are known as alveoli. Okay. Now, these lungs, you can say that the human respiratory system consists of 2 lungs that houses the bronchi, bronchioles and the alveoli. Okay. Now the lungs are very important and delicate part of our body. Therefore, they need to be protected, and they are protected by a bony covering, and that bony covering is your rib cage. But where do the lungs lie? Right? So let's see, the lungs are present in the thoracic cavity on a dome-shaped structure, on a dome-shaped muscle which is your diaphragm. Okay? Diaphragm plays a very important role in respiration. We'll talk about it. Okay? So here, this is your respiratory tract. That the air enters from the nostrils to the nasal cavity, then the pharynx goes towards the larynx, then the larynx branches into the larynx will now proceed to trachea, which will branch out into bronchi. The bronchi will branch out into further tiny tubules, bronchioles, which ends up into tiny tubules, which are balloon-like structures, which are alveoli. And these alveoli are very, very important because these alveoli will give up the oxygen to the blood vessels. These alveoli have an extensive network of blood vessels. So this oxygen will give the blood vessels to give the oxygen to the blood vessels, and the blood vessels in turn give up the carbon dioxide towards the alveoli so that we can breathe it out. Okay, clear? So this is our respiratory tract. Okay, now let's talk about that breathing, the first step of respiration. Okay, it's just a physical process. No new substance are getting formed. Okay, so let's talk about that. It has 2 parts, inhalation and exhalation. Inhalation means to take in the oxygen rich air. Okay, so first one is inhalation, which means to take up the oxygen rich air, and then we have to give up the carbon dioxide out of the body, right? Because otherwise it is going to be harmful. So then the next step is exhalation, to give out the carbon dioxide rich air in the atmosphere. Okay, now for this process to happen, of course we have to make space for the air to enter. Okay, so let's talk about this mechanism of breathing. See, for inhalation first, remember, we are taking in the air inside our body, right? So of course for that we have to make space. So to make that space, of course, we have to increase the chest cavity. The volume of the chest cavity has to be increased, right? So that the air can be accommodated. So chest cavity has to be increased. Now you guys just help me out, take up the air inside your body. Just inhale, breathe in, keep your hand on your chest. Okay, now inhale. So as you can see, when we inhale, your body is moving upward, right, and outwards. So that is your rib cage. You can see that during inhalation, the rib cage moves outwards and also upwards. Okay, now let's talk about this dome-shaped diaphragm on which the lungs lie. Okay, so when we inhale, we have to make space. We have to increase the volume of the chest cavity. So your diaphragm is a dome shape, right? So we contract the diaphragm. The diaphragm is contracted, and when it gets contracted, it is going to become from a dome shape to flat structure. So the diaphragm goes down. So the third will be that diaphragm. Your diaphragm will go down. The diaphragm moves downward. Okay, now let's talk about exhalation. That the opposite will happen in the exhalation. Okay, so here you can see that we have to give up the carbon dioxide rich air in the atmosphere. So the entire process would be different. See here, we have to now decrease the chest cavity. So here, chest cavity will decrease. Now again, keep your hand on your chest and then exhale. So you will see that your body is moving back, right? So here you can see the rib cage will move down and inwards. Similarly, let's talk about this diaphragm. Your diaphragm will now again go back to its dome-shaped structure. So it will relax and become the dome-shaped structure. Okay. So here you can see that the diaphragm will again relax. Whereas during inhalation, the diaphragm was contracting. Clear? I hope it's clear. Let me write diaphragm again for you. So it is diaphragm. Your diaphragm will contract and it will become flattened structure from the dome-shaped structure. So this was the mechanism of breathing so that we can take up the important oxygen, right, and give out the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this process was physical. Okay, this was breathing. But I cannot see energy from here, right? So let's talk about then that here then next process would be cellular respiration. Now what do we mean by cellular respiration? See, respiration in the entire process is a physicochemical process, right? It involves 3 steps. First one was breathing, inhalation, exhalation. Second one was gaseous exchange that was taking place through the alveoli. Okay. Third is your cellular respiration. So during cellular respiration, what will happen? Let's see that cellular respiration is the breakdown. It's the breakdown of nutrient, or you can say glucose molecule, to obtain energy from it. And that process is cellular respiration. Okay. Now, this happens in different spaces. So here we are talking about that this is happening within a cell. Okay. Let's start with it. That we have a 6-carbon molecule glucose, C6H12O6. Okay. Now, there are different modes of respiration, like that different organisms. So, we need different modes of oxygen, or we need different mode of, let's say that we need different modes of respiration, right? Let's see. Like us humans, we cannot survive without oxygen, right? So, we need oxygen so that we can get energy. But there are certain organisms that does not require this oxygen. Okay. So we can, on the basis of requirement of oxygen, we can categorize respiration into 2 types. Aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Okay. So first, let's talk about anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration that happens in the absence of oxygen. Okay, so this happens in lower organism, for example, in your yeast and certain bacteria. Okay, so what's happening here? In the absence of oxygen, see, the first step is common in all the organism. Prokaryotes, eukaryotes, new complex organism, simpler organism. Okay, so the first step is breakdown of glucose into 3-carbon molecule pyruvate. This happens in cytoplasm and it is common in all organisms. Okay, this process, this step is glycolysis. Lysis means breakdown and glyco means glucose. So breakdown of glucose, which is happening in the cytoplasm. Okay, so here you can see this process is glycolysis, which is common in all the organisms. Now the picture starts from here. That now for the digestion, or you can say for the conversion of this pyruvate, now some organisms need oxygen, some do not need oxygen, and then there are certain special scenarios as well. So let's talk about it. That first, in the absence of oxygen, which is anaerobic respiration. In the absence of oxygen, this pyruvate is converted into an alcohol and releases byproduct. This alcohol is ethanol that happens in yeast, okay, and also release carbon dioxide. But these are byproducts. The ultimate product is energy. But as you can see here, incomplete breakdown of glucose is taking place. Therefore, this energy produced would be less. Okay. Now, moving forward to talk about the next type. In us humans, how do we get this energy, right? So in us, there is a special process going on which is Aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration that requires oxygen for the conversion of this pyruvate into energy. Okay, so the ultimate product is energy, and here complete breakdown is happening. Therefore, the energy released is more, approximately 36 to 38 ATP. The ATP is the energy currency of the cell, adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so that is the energy currency of the cell. The byproduct release are carbon dioxide and water, and this conversion takes place in the mitochondria. Okay, now let's talk about that. I want to do exercise today. I am very lazy, and now I got to know that exercise will help me and workout will help me to get into the proper physique, and also it will help in the mental to cope up with the mental stress as well. Okay, so I've decided to work out. Now I decided to do heavy exercises, right? Weightlifting, jogging, running, sprinting. But what happened? We need more oxygen. But our body does not get enough oxygen while we are doing these exercises. So what happened suddenly? There is a cramp in our muscle, in our arm, or maybe in the leg. What happened there? So let's talk about, this is a special scenario where even us humans are undergoing anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration. What is it? In humans, yes, seriously. Let's talk about it. That this happens in the lack of oxygen in the muscle cells. Okay, during heavy exercises we require a lot of energy, and for that we require a lot of oxygen, but we are not breathing faster enough. Okay, so that we can get a lot more of oxygen. So what happened here, that in the lack of oxygen our muscle cells start to respire anaerobically, and then this pyruvate is converted into a 3-carbon molecule, which is lactic acid, and release a little bit of energy as well. Okay, now listen to me here. What happened? This lactic acid, if gets accumulated in our body, okay, they will cause cramps. So you might have noticed a sudden pain in your muscles, in your arms while doing heavy exercises. Now what is it? It is because of the accumulation of lactic acid. Here the body is, or you can say the muscle cells are respiring anaerobically. Okay, so these are the different pathways of glucose breakdown so that we can achieve energy from it. Okay, I hope it's clear. Now we are moving forward to the next type. Before that, let's solve this quick question, that during respiration, exchange of gases takes place in. Okay, it's a very important question. It has been asked multiple times. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so remember those balloon-like structure. Those balloon-like structure at the end of the bronchioles were alveoli. Alveoli consist of an extensive network of the blood vessel. Okay, so what happened here, that this blood vessel will give up the carbon dioxide into the alveoli so that it can be exhaled out. Okay, whereas this alveoli gives up the oxygen in the blood vessel. Okay, so that they can be taken to the cell to make energy from it. So this gaseous exchange, the gaseous exchange is happening in the alveoli, right, which is present in the lungs. So here the correct answer is option B, that during respiration exchange of gases is taking place in the alveoli of the lung. Okay, now moving forward to the next type of life process. We need energy. We have to take in food and oxygen for that. But 37.2 trillion cells in our body. How do we take food and oxygen to each and every cell? Now, of course, you know that absorption is taking place in the small intestine, and oxygen is received from the alveoli in the blood vessels, right? But each and every cell, what happens if a toe cell needs to be repaired and it needs energy? What happens, like we know that for our brain to work, we need energy, right? So how do we take this food and oxygen to the brain cells so that they can make energy? So of course for that we need a car. Okay, we need a transportation medium here. So you know that just how the car, let's make up this car. Okay, let's have this car. Is it looking nice? I hope so. Yes. Now this car will run on the road. Okay, this car runs on the road. Okay, now let's see. We forget to start off the car. So we know that the car has engine. Okay, so that it can start the car and then the car will start moving. And who is sitting in the car? Of course us. So let's sit in the car and it will take us from our home. Okay, for example, ma'am has to go. So I will go from my home to the studio where I am making this amazing session for you. Okay, so here ma'am is traveling. Okay, now similarly the food also wants to travel, oxygen also wants to travel. So they need their transportation medium. Okay, now who makes up this transportation medium in our body? So now let's talk about it. Okay, let's see that. Alright, so let's talk about this transportation, right? Where do we transport and how do we transport our food and oxygen? So we need a car. We need a road so that this car might run, and then we need an engine. Okay, so let's talk about in our body. This car is your blood. The blood will carry food and oxygen. Now, where does this car will run? Where will this blood flow, right? So the blood will flow in this tiny tubes present, which are blood vessels, blood tubes. Okay, now what about this engine? How do we transport or how do we start off this flow? So for that we need a pumping organ or engine, and that is your heart. And this together formulates a circulatory system in our body so that it can circulate the blood in the entire body and transport substances. Okay, not only this food and oxygen, but it will also help in the transport of the waste material so that we can expel it out of the body. It will help in the transport of the hormones, right? Every cell needs hormone as well, right? So it will help in the transport of many other substances as well. Okay, therefore this circulatory system is very important in our body. Okay, now let us talk about these components one by one. So first we are talking about blood. Now what is blood? So blood is a fluid connective tissue. What is tissue? So tissue is your group of cells performing similar function. Okay, now the blood flows. It's a fluid, and also it connects one organ system to the another, right? Therefore this blood is a fluid connective tissue. All right, now let's talk about that this blood consists of two components. The fluid component, which is 55% of the entire blood, and then there is cellular component, which is the rest 45% of the blood. Okay, now this fluid part is known as plasma. You will see in the blood like this, it flows, right? So the fluid part is the plasma, which is pale yellow, or you can see colorless. Okay, now it consists of 90 to 92% of water. Okay, rest it consists of proteins and other substances, electrolytes and waste and other substances. It will help in the transport of other substances like hormones, right? And also waste products as well. So they get transported in the plasma. Then let's come to the cellular component. The cellular components are red blood cell. Okay, RBCs. Now why is the blood red? Because of these red blood cells, of course. But what does these red blood cells have? So these red blood cells have a special pigment, and that special pigment is hemoglobin. Now this hemoglobin consists of iron, and this iron, because of this iron, this gives red color to the red blood cell, and in turn, since these red blood cells are abundant, they are maximum in number, therefore your blood appears red. Okay, so this was about the color, but what is the function of the red blood cell? So let's talk about that this red blood cell will help in the transport of oxygen. It will help in the transport of oxygen. It will give the oxygen to each and every cell so that they can make their energy. Okay. Next we have is the white blood cell. These white blood cells are the soldiers of our body, or you can say that they are the warriors of our body, because they help to make our defense system, or you can say they build up our immune system. Okay. Now, how do they build up the immune system? So you will see that the white blood cell they will have different type of cells like leukocytes, and also they can make up antibodies. Okay, antibodies will be formed so that they will build up the immune system. Okay, next let's talk about, we have the third component, which is platelets. Now these platelets are not cells, rather they are cell fragments. Now, you know, I was in the mood of workout and I was jogging. So while I was jogging, I fell. Of course, sometimes we meet with an accident, but no worries, because life goes on, right? So here what happened to me, there was a little bit of scar on my hand, right? I started bleeding there. But after some time, I noticed that the blood stopped coming out from there. Now, why is it so? So let's talk about it, that this is because of the special cells or cell fragment present in the blood, and those are platelets. Okay, these platelets will help to clot the blood. They will clot the blood, and therefore the blood will stop oozing out from there. Okay, understood? Now this blood, let's make this blood flow. Where does the blood flow? In the blood vessels. Okay, now let's talk about these blood vessels. These are tiny tubes in which the blood flow. Okay, let's talk about it, that we have to send the oxygen also to the cell. We have to take the waste product from the cell as well, right? So let's see that for perform different functions, we have different blood vessels, so that they can take the blood to the pumping organ, and from the pumping organ to different organ system. Okay, so for that we have a network of blood vessels. So let's talk about that. We have different kinds of blood vessel. First we are talking about is the artery. Can you see this artery? Yes. Now let's talk about this artery. That artery carries A for artery, A for away. So arteries carries the blood away from the heart. Okay. Now let's talk about these arteries. That the arteries are thick. They are thick walled. Okay, so the arteries are thick walled, and also they have elastic wall. So their lumen is very, very narrow, right? And therefore you will say that the arteries, here the blood flow with high pressure. Okay. Now, very important point, that generally, not always, that means there is an exception, we'll talk about it. Okay, generally arteries carry oxygenated blood. Okay, now what is the exception? So we have pulmonary artery. We'll talk about this when we will talk about the blood flow. So pulmonary artery, it carries the deoxygenated blood. Therefore the correct definition of artery will be that it carries the blood away from the heart. A for away, A for artery. Okay. Next, blood vessel. Let's see. This artery, you will see, it will follow. It's a big artery, right? Very big artery. So of course it will branch out so that it can reach out the different cells or different organ system, right? So this big artery will then branch out into smaller tubules, which is the arteriole. further into very, very, very tiny tubule. You can say that they are made up of only one cell. So they are one cell thick, and that is your capillaries. Capillaries are one cell thick. Okay. Now these capillaries will help in the exchange of materials from the cell towards the blood. Okay. Then the capillaries will start branching together. So the capillaries which consist of the waste product will start branching and forms the venule, and then they will form, these venules will branch together to join into as the superior, or you can say the ultimate vein. So the third type of the blood vessel is the vein. So how do we call vein? How do we define vein? So vein are the blood vessels which carries generally it carries the deoxygenated blood. Okay, but generally that means not always. So there is also an exception. So how do we properly define our veins then? So you can say that the veins here takes the blood towards the heart. They will take the blood towards the heart, and they are thinner than the arteries, okay, and inelastic, and also they carry generally carbon dioxide, okay, or you can say deoxygenated blood. And the vein also has valves to prevent the backflow of the blood, okay. And here let's suppose that which is the exception. Let's talk about the exception. So we have pulmonary vein. This pulmonary vein will now carry the oxygenated blood, okay, because it's an exception. Now we know that the blood flows in the blood vessels. What about the starting pumping organ, right? So let's talk about this pumping organ, which is our heart. Now just take your palm and just fold your fingers towards the curvy area, okay. Now you will notice that you have formed a fist. So this much is your heart, okay. This much is your heart, which is located on the thoracic cavity in the cardiac notch, okay. This cardiac notch is present in the thoracic cavity towards the left side, slightly tilted, okay, not just almost at the left side, but slightly tilted towards the left side, and that's why your left lung is smaller than the right lung. Interesting, right? Now let's take a look at the heart. So the heart is pumping organ. It never stops. It rhythmically contracts and relaxes, so that it can pump the blood out, right, and also receive the blood so that it can purify it, okay. Now let's see how is this process going on, and let's see about the heart first. So here let's say that the heart is separated. It is very well separated into the left side and the right side, okay. Now remember this technique, Lord. That means left side will receive the oxygenated blood and the right side will receive the carbon dioxide rich blood, or you can say the deoxygenated blood, okay. Now the heart is very well separated with the help of a septum into right side and the left side, okay. Now the heart has 4 chambers, the upper chambers and the lower chambers. The upper chambers are smaller, whereas the lower chambers are larger, okay. So let's talk about that these upper chambers are known as atrium and the lower chambers are known as ventricles, okay. Now let's talk about that the heart will have 2 things. First of all, it will receive the blood. It is going to receive the blood, okay, and then it is going to pump the blood out into different organ systems, right, so that it can go to the different organ systems. So now let's talk about it here, that 2 things are happening. First, it will receive the blood and then it will pump the blood. So it needs different blood vessels, right. So let's talk about that the heart receives the blood. The blood is going towards the heart. So for that we have veins. The largest vein is the vena cava. Vena cava is the largest vein. Okay. Now, it is divided into two. The blood which is getting from the upper half is known as superior vena cava, and the blood that is received from the lower half is known as the inferior vena cava. So, vena cava is the largest vein. Okay. Now, let's talk about that they have to pump the blood as well to different body organs, right? So, here this heart will contract. The heart will contract so that the blood will be pumped out into the largest artery, which is aorta. So, aorta is your largest artery. Now, where do we find our pulmonary vein and pulmonary artery, those exceptions, right? So, let's see that. Let's talk about the blood circulation, and there you will notice the function of this exception and beauty of biology. So, here, just try to remember this diagram. It's very important and you can make it on your own as well. Okay. So, for that, what do? We have this heart here. The heart has 4 chambers, right? So, we have drawn the 4 chambers. Now, let's start off with, we will need lungs, as lungs also play a very important role in the blood circulation, and of course, the cell requires this oxygen. Okay. Now, let's talk about that the heart has 2 sides, right? Right side and left side. So, let's start off with one side and then you will notice the different sides. Okay. So, here, let's talk about that this one is your right side and here this is your left side. Okay. Now, what's happening? Suppose let's start off with a cell. Okay. Now, here, the cell received oxygen and it transported or released carbon dioxide, the waste material, right? Now, this waste material is secreted into a blood vessel. So, this blood vessel which gets the carbon dioxide, here the blood is deoxygenated. So, it has to take up to the heart, right? So that the heart can pump it towards the lungs so that it can get oxygenated. So, let's see that this carbon dioxide is carried by the blood vessel, which is vein. Now, the largest vein is your vena cava. So, this vena cava is carrying the carbon dioxide, you can say deoxygenated blood from the different body parts. Now, this vena cava takes it towards the right atrium. Okay. So, here you can see that the blood is flown in the vena cava and reaches the right atrium. From the right atrium, it will reach the right ventricle. So, the blood is now at the right ventricle. Okay. Now, what do? We have to make this blood oxygenated. We have to release this carbon dioxide and make this blood oxygenated. So, what do? We take this blood towards the lungs because we know that the lungs will have alveoli and that will help in the gaseous exchange, right? So, here you will say oxygenation will take place. Alright, so here you can say that this blood vessel takes the blood away from the heart. Away from the heart, that means it's artery. But what kind of blood was there on the right side? It was deoxygenated. So, this artery is carrying deoxygenated blood. That means it is our pulmonary artery. Now, this deoxygenated blood has reached the lungs. What do we have here? Gaseous exchange. So, here oxygenation has been taken place and now the blood became oxygenated. Now, we have to take this blood from the lungs towards the heart so that it can pump to different body systems, right? Of course, we need the engine. So, what do? There is a blood vessel that carries the oxygenated blood towards the heart. Which blood vessel carries the blood towards the heart? It's a vein. So, of course, we have a vein. But this vein is carrying oxygenated blood. So, that means that it is our pulmonary vein. It is the pulmonary vein which carries this oxygenated blood towards the left side, towards the left atria. From the left atria, the blood will go towards the left ventricle. Okay, the left atria will contract and the blood will go to the left ventricle. Now, the left ventricle has the oxygenated blood. That's what we need, right? That's what the cell need. So the blood will so you can say the heart will contract. The left ventricle, you can say the heart will contract, and from these left ventricle, the blood will be pumped to the different body parts. So this oxygenated blood is going away from the heart towards the body parts. So that means it has to be an artery, because the blood is taking away from the heart and it's the oxygenated blood, okay? And the largest artery is your aorta. So now you will notice that the blood entered the heart twice. One oxygenated and then deoxygenated, okay? So this type of circulation is known as double circulation, which happens in humans, right? It happens in birds and mammals as well, because we are warm-blooded animals. We need more energy so that we can control or we can maintain our body temperature. Whereas other organisms like fishes and reptiles and amphibians, they are cold-blooded. They do not need to maintain the body temperature. They just keep it according to the surrounding. But we need to maintain the body temperature. For that we need energy. And for energy, we need oxygen, right? More and more oxygen. So that's why our heart is separated into two sides where there is no mixing of blood. The left and the right side remain separated through the septum, okay? So that efficiently oxygen can be transported to the blood parts. And since 2 times the blood is going towards the heart, so you can say the body undergoes double circulation. Okay, clear? Let's solve this quick question and see that yes, we are clear with the concept. So blood, the fluid connective tissue, which of the following are the functions of functions are related to transportation? Let's talk about them. You have further options. Let's see. All right, let's see. So blood, the fluid connective tissue, we have plasma, we have RBC, WBC and platelets in the blood. Okay, now their function will be the blood's function, right? Of course. So let's see. Blood distributes food. Of course, it will help as the transport system. So this is correct. Then blood also transports oxygen and other nutrients to different cells of the body. Obviously, we have RBCs which carries this oxygen and other nutrients to different cells. So this is also correct. Blood also carries waste products to different parts of the body for excretion. That is also true. The blood will help in the transportation not only of food and oxygen, but also of the waste product, right? So that they can be removed out from their differentiated organ system, right? So all of these statements are true, and the blood performs several various functions so that they can keep up our body maintained and also will help in the survival. Okay. So therefore, the correct answer is all of these. All of these are the function of the transportation system which is done by the blood. Okay. Now, let's move to the next life process, and this life process is your excretory system. Okay. Now, let's talk about this excretory system here, that humans undergo, or you can say all the animals will undergo metabolic reactions. Right? Now what happens? Like for example, we know we have ingested the food. Now the undigested food will have to be expelled out of your body. So for that we have egestion. Right? Then of course the waste product that we have inhaled, carbon dioxide, it has to be removed from your body. Right? So for that we have exhalation. Now let's talk about these metabolic reactions. All the metabolic reactions, suppose we will have substrate and this substrate will form the product, but along with that it will form certain byproduct which could be waste, and this waste, when it gets accumulated in our body, it will be toxic, right? So thereby there is a need to get rid of this toxic material, to get rid of this waste. Okay, and for that we have a special organ system, which is our excretory system. Okay, so let's talk about that, the process of removal of the nitrogenous waste, which is formed from the metabolic reactions, and the removal of this nitrogenous waste is known as excretion, which is done by the excretory system. Okay, now let's talk about here that in humans, the nitrogenous waste that needs to be excreted out is your urea. Okay, so in humans, the nitrogenous waste that is secreted out is your urea, alright, which is formed in the liver. Alright, now let's talk about this excretory system. So we have two kidneys, or you can say one pair of kidney, bean-shaped kidney. Alright, now this kidney will receive the blood. This kidney will receive the blood from the aorta, which will then get filtered to form the urine, right? And this filtered blood is then sent towards the heart so that it can pump it to different body parts through the vena cava. Okay, so here you've understood the filtration. Now let's talk about that these kidneys will form the urine, which has to be excreted out from our body, right? Which consists of the nitrogenous waste. Okay, then the kidney forms the urine, which is then sent to the tube, two tubes which are ureters. Then the ureters open, there are two ureters, so you can say one pair of ureter which opens into a sac-like structure, which is urinary bladder. And then from this muscular urinary bladder, there is a small muscular tube, that is your urethra, from where the excretion, or you can say micturition, takes place. Okay, now the process of removal of, or to excrete the urine is known as micturition. Now let's talk about that. We are talking about urine. How is this urine formed in kidney, right? So let's talk about that these kidneys have these microscopic fundamental cells, which are known as nephrons. Fundamental cell which will help in the making of the urine, and each kidney have approximately 1 million of nephrons. Okay, now let's talk about it, that here they have a cup-shaped system. They have a cup-shaped structure, and this cup-shaped structure is known as Bowman's capsule. It's known as Bowman's capsule. Okay, now this Bowman's capsule have an extensive network of capillaries. They have an extensive network of capillaries, and this network is known as your glomerulus. Please remember the name, glomerulus. Okay, now this cup-shaped structure will further move down into tubules. So they will proceed into tube-like structure. You can see the tube-like structure. Okay, let me draw it with another color. So it will proceed with the tube-like structure, finally opening into a long tube. Okay, so here you can see this extensive network. We have opened it. So this nephron consists of a cup-shaped structure, which is Bowman's capsule. Then the tubular part, which ends into a duct known as collecting duct. Okay, so this is the structure of nephron, which is a fundamental unit of kidney, and each kidney have 1 million nephrons, which will help to make the urine. But how is this urine formed actually, right? So let's talk about first here. Let's see the first, the urine formation happens in three ways, in three steps. Okay, first step is filtration. First step is filtration. Okay, so you have seen here that there is an extensive network of the capillaries known as glomerulus. Now they contain, of course, blood, right? So what happens here in the Bowman's capsule, they have tiny pores present. That will help, that will act as a sieve. You know, in the tea, whenever we are making tea, so we have to separate the tea tea leaves from the actual tea that we have to drink, right? For that we have sieve. Similarly, it acts as a sieve so that we can filter out the things in the Bowman's capsule. Okay. Now, what all things are getting filtered here? Let's suppose. So, the blood is reaching the glomerulus is taking the blood, and here we have Bowman's capsule. Okay. So, everything except for the big proteins, everything except for the big proteins gets filtered out in the glomerulus. Okay, in the Bowman's capsule from the glomerulus. In the Bowman's capsule from the glomerulus. Okay, so this filtrate, of course, it is formed from the glomerulus, so it is known as glomerular filtrate. But it consists of everything now except for the big proteins, right? And of course, our blood needs all of these things. These are very important. Even useful as well as harmful substance, both are getting filtered here. So then what do? We need that useful substance. So then the next step would be reabsorption. Reabsorption. But of course, we cannot take everything back, right? Otherwise, what would be the use of filtration? So then here it would be selective reabsorption, where we are taking in useful substances like glucose, amino acids, potassium, sodium, right? Certain electrolytes. So they are getting absorbed again back into the tubules, right? Here you can say they are getting reabsorbed back into the blood so that we can get our important substances back. Okay, so that is reabsorption. Why reabsorption? Because we are taking it back in the blood vessel. Okay, then let's talk about the third step. The third step would be tubular secretion. Now, when we were reabsorbing, so some amount of water was also reabsorbed, right? So we need to get rid of it as well. So in tubular secretion, we are now secreting things again into the tubules, or you can say those things are your excess water, some electrolytes, okay, so that they can maintain the pH balance as well, okay, and also the nitrogenous waste, urea also gets secreted into this. Alright, so here you can say these are the 3 steps for the urine formation. And where is the urine formed? It is formed in the kidney. Okay, so let's talk about here in the urine formation. The first step was to form glomerular filtrate. Okay, the first step is glomerular filtration. Now let me tell you that of course most of the useful products are absorbed, right? So 99% of this filtrate has to be reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay, so then there is reabsorption. Reabsorption, where useful substances like glucose, amino acid gets reabsorbed into the blood. Okay, and then there is tubular secretion, so that excess water and some electrolytes can be, and also waste can be secreted into the tubules. Okay, finally there will be a collecting duct in which the urine is stored or urine is formed, collected, and this collecting duct, several collecting ducts, they open into the ureter. These collecting ducts open into the ureter, which carries this urine down towards the urinary bladder. Okay, now your urinary bladder starts filling up. Once it gets filled up, of course the muscle will stretch. Okay, so this stretching of the muscle will send a signal to the brain that I am filling up. The urinary bladder says that I am getting filled up, just do something. So then the brain signals that you can contract. Once you will contract, the urine will be excreted out. Okay, so of course the urinary bladder will contract, and that's how the urine gets excreted out through a tiny muscular tube, that is urethra. Okay, so that sums up about your excretory system. Now also you might have seen in the summer seasons, like there is a lot of perspiration and you're sweating, right? Also in your underarms also you can see patches, right? So what are those patches formed of? So that is sweating. Now sweating also gets rid of the excess of water and electrolytes from our body, and that can also be a mode of excretion. Okay, clear? So all this we were talking about humans and animals, right? So let's talk about this important question here. The dash is a network of tiny blood vessels which is located at the beginning of a nephron. So what do we know? What do we this network of tiny blood vessels known as? Alright guys, let's check it. So here, this network of tiny blood vessels, okay, this is a cup-shaped Bowman's capsule which has a tiny networks of capillaries, okay, and this capillaries is known as glomerulus, okay. Now, let's talk about that. We have been talking about a lot about animals and we are talking about us humans, but what about these immovable organisms like plants? We talked about they also need nutrition, right? We talked about that they also have stomata for gaseous exchange. But then how are things getting transported in the plants? They are immovable. Do they also have blood vessels? But no, they do not. It's actually a little bit of different system going on in the plants. Okay, so let's talk about that the plants also need water. They also need minerals and organic substances like food. So how are these substances getting transported in the plants? So for that, they have specialized tissues, okay, and these tissues are forming together vascular bundles. The vascular bundles are tissues that will help in the transportation of water, minerals and food in the plants, okay. That tissue is known as vascular bundle. Now, there are two types of vascular bundle, two types of vascular tissue present in the plants, that is xylem and phloem, okay. Now, let's talk about this xylem here. That xylem will help in the conduction of water and minerals. We know that in a plant, this soil consists of water and the roots will take up the water, right? So of course the roots will take up the water from the soil and transport it towards the other parts of the plant, and majorly leaves require water for the process of photosynthesis, right? So here you can say that the xylem conducts water and minerals in only one direction, and therefore they undergo unidirectional conduction. Their conduction is unidirectional. Okay, now let's talk about that these xylem are dead cells. Now suppose if you have a plumbing system at your home, right, so that you can open your tap and you can get this water. Now what if the plumbing system or the pipes that you've installed are very weak? The water flows with a very much high pressure, right? So the pipes will not be able to withstand the pressure and they will break, they will burst open, right? So that's why these xylem are made up of dead cells and they are thick tubes. They are thick tubes so that they can withstand this high pressure and support the entire tubes here. Okay, so for the dead cells they have lignin coating. Okay, and they are thick tubes. Now let's talk about the organic substances or soluble substances, which is the food material. So we have another vascular tissue, phloem, that will help in the conduction of soluble material, that is food. Okay, now let's suppose that in your plant the leaves during the process of photosynthesis makes food. Okay, so that would be the source, and then other body parts, other plant parts will be the sink. Okay, the other body parts will be, or you can say other parts will be the sink which requires the food. Okay, then let's suppose we have carrots. Have you heard of carrots? The carrots are modified so that their roots can store food. Their roots will store food. So then the roots will provide food to other plants parts. Okay, so here you can see that the conduction of food materials can be in two ways. Okay, therefore you can say that they are bidirectional conduction is happening here. Bidirectional conduction of food is happening here. Okay, now let's suppose one more thing, that during the sun time, during the daytime, you will see that they are making food, right? So the leaves have food. But then during the night time, of course, they need food, right? So during the night time, other plant parts can also act as that will store the excess of the starch. They will act as source so that they can give food to the different plant parts. Okay, during the senescence time where the leaves are getting shedded, then also different parts can act as source of the food. Okay, so of course this conduction could be bidirectional conduction. And the phloem is generally living. The phloem is living. It consists of maximum living parts, and they are thin tubes. Okay, they are thin tubes. Okay, now let's talk about how they will help in the conduction. So first let's talk about this water here. Okay, so here we are talking that how is this water getting absorbed from the soil and goes towards the xylem. So let's see here that water is absorbed through the root hairs. Okay, now that happens because of the process of osmosis. Okay, during the process of osmosis, you can see the water gets taken up after the active intake of the ions. So the water follows these ions, right, because of the concentration gradient, and now the root cells absorb the water, and this water, because of this root pressure, reaches the xylem. From the xylem, that reaches the base of the stem, right? Now you will see that during the daytime, the weather here is very dry, right? And also it is hot. It is very dry and hot. So what will happen? That here there are leaves, and in the leaves there are tiny pore stomata present that will create a suction pressure. Just like you're sucking from the straw, right? You are taking up the cold drink of water from the straw and it starts to move upwards. Similarly here, suppose this is a straw, right? So they are creating this transpiration because of the excess of dryness and hotness in the atmosphere. They are creating a suction pressure, and that is also known as the transpirational pull. Transpirational pull. Okay, so they are creating a transpirational pull. Because of that, the water starts to move upwards. Okay, and that's how the water reaches the leaves from the soil. Okay, now next is the food. So of course, for the transportation of food, let's suppose that it's actually this is actually an active process. It's an active process as it requires energy. Okay, for its conduction, the conduction of food is known as translocation, which is an active process. Okay, that happens with the help of phloem. Okay, it's an active process. Okay, the conduction of food is known as translocation. Now, so that's how the water, food and minerals gets transported in the plants with the help of vascular bundles, xylem and phloem. Okay, now moving forward, let's talk about excretion. The plants might also need to excrete, right? So how do they get rid of the excess waste? So let's see that plant get rid of the waste product in the different manner. Okay, for example, the gaseous waste like CO2 and O2 are expelled from the stomatas. Water vapors from the leaves through the transpiration process through the stomatas, they are getting expelled or transpired. Okay, now solid waste such as they are stored in the plant body and they can be expelled out by the shredding of leaves, peeling of bark, falling off the fruits, etc. Right, you might have seen that during some time there is a time when the leaves are shedded. So that is also a process of excretion by the plants. Okay, now gums and raisins are excreted from the lenticels in the bark. Okay, but remember that they are stored in the old xylem. They are stored in the old xylem, then they get excreted from the lenticels. Okay, and also some waste are excreted by the plants in the soil, right? And see the soil present inside surrounding the roots. So then also some of the waste can be expelled out directly into the soil as well. Okay, so that's how excretion in plants takes place. Now remember, these gums and raisins, which are excretory product, or you can say the waste product for the plants, they are very, very useful for us humans because we can make certain adhesives and other industry, we can use it for other commercial industrial purposes. Okay, so they might be excretory product for the plants, but we can utilize them. All right, now it's time for us to solve this next question, that the movement of materials from the leaves to other tissues of the plant is called. You have options: transpiration, translocation, transcription and translation. All right, I hope you guys have answered it correctly. Let's see. The correct answer is translocation. See, transpiration is the removal of excess amount of water in the form of water vapor through the aerial parts of the plant. Transcription and translation you will study in the genetics part. Okay, whereas this translocation is the movement or conduction of the food from the leaves, which is the source of the food, where it is getting made, right, towards the other tissues of the plant. So here the correct answer is translocation. Okay, now with this we have come towards the end of this session, and you guys were very much with me, right? And now we've got to know that all these life processes are very, very important for us. So I would request all of you out there to have good food and also take up the oxygen from the atmosphere. Try to do some exercises, yoga, all right? And also just take care of yourselves. Okay, guys? So I'm going to see you in the next session. Till then, keep on tuned with us and also keep on taking care of yourselves. Okay? Bye-bye. Thank you all for joining.